We made this.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Pick Up a Podcast, and this week I have with me a Dave Bond from Do You Expect Us to Talk? Hello, Dave, how are you?
Good evening, folks. Yeah, absolutely fine. Thank you for having me on.
I'm sure that we'll get into some interesting discussion about you and your podcast and the podcast that you've been on in the past. So
hopefully, because we've been gasbagging for ages before you hit record.
We have, yeah. We've basically done a full podcast off air, which is fantastic.
Yeah, he's had the answers to all the questions he's about to ask.
Exactly. Well, that's the way you need to work it, Dave. To be honest with you, if you know what you're talking about, and as I say, I've not listened to anything that you've done whatsoever. I've not seen any of your articles, and I just needed to get those answers out there. So.
Yeah, you have listened to a little bit in the last day or two, haven't you? So you have some idea.
Yes, I'm being a bit facetious, so forgive me. Yes, so Dave, would you like to give us a bit of background on yourself? How did you come into the podcasting landscape, and what other medium do you use, and have you been involved in?
Slowly and tentatively is the answer to the first one. In terms of other, it's something I sort of wanted to do for a long time. I mean, being, kind of getting towards middle age now, I've been listening to podcasts since they first sort of surfaced. And, it started with stuff you wouldn't aspire to do because it was podcasts by famous people. I mean, it started with Ricky Gervais's podcast with Carl Pilkington, which I'd still recommend to anybody. They're still fantastic. I mean, they've tried to spin that guy off into TV shows and everything. Yeah. And still the funniest thing they ever did was sit in their own recording studio with him there as a producer and fire silly questions at him. So there was that. Then there was some of the obvious things like Kermode and Mayo and so on. So I've had various podcasts over the years, but they're the ones that sort of stuck out. And then sort of two key podcasts in my sort of development, maybe three actually. They rebooted Star Trek about 10 years ago. The J.J. Abrams films with all the rest of it. And I was kind of excited for that coming up. So I was looking around on iTunes at the time for anything Star Trek related to see if I could get any of the build up to it.
I'm sure there would be some Star Trek podcasts around at that point, surely.
What I actually found turned out not to be a Star Trek podcast. I found Now Playing.
Oh, yes, I know Now Playing, yeah.
The film was released, Star Trek 2009 was released in May.
Yeah.
And they went through the films in order, and they just done the motion picture, which tells me I found them in like January, February 2009, something like that. And I've been listening to them ever since. Clear links to what I do now, although we've turned into something quite different. And then the following year, and I don't know how I found this, I don't know if I was looking for Star Wars or not, but I found a podcaster called Alex Shaw. And he'd been involved in a podcast I never really listened to called The Digital Cowboys, because that was video games. And I like the odd video game, but I don't play enough that I don't need to consume podcasts on it like it's Empire Magazine or something. Yeah. I'm not playing different games every week, so I didn't really bother with that. But he did some shows on Star Wars. He did one per film, where he kind of had almost a mixture of conversation and almost audio essay format. So he would talk to his mic about some points about the film, things that he'd clearly written, and then he'd be talking to others and so on. And it was really, really good. And he carried on for a while as Digital Gonzo, and he's gone through a couple of changes now, but if anyone wants to check out any of the stuff I'm talking about here, currently has a podcast he does with his wife, Sharon, called School of Movies. Right. Two really key podcasts on what I became as a podcaster myself. I'm not that like either of them, but I'm influenced by both. And this sort of went on for years. And funnily enough, I nearly ended up appearing on one of the forerunners of School of Movies, because I ended up getting into a long Twitter conversation with him about the Richard Donner Superman films, Christopher Reeve.
All right,
films. And he kind of tentatively invited me on. It wasn't are you free to record with us Tuesday, but it was might have you on when we record those. And I kind of started wimping out. I started going, well, silly West Country accent. Nah, I don't know. And it just went on like this for years. And then about 2014, I had a breakup in my life, and I moved into this flat by myself. And suddenly I knew everything. I basically got a friend of mine to build a computer from scratch, a PC.
Okay.
And when I was buying all the peripheries to it, I bought myself a nice microphone. And it was me saying, it's there if you have the balls to do this. Final bit of the journey to me actually starting was literally about a year later. Chris Byrne, he's at Cinematronics on Twitter. He put out a tweet. I'd always followed him. We used to talk to each other now and again, and I'd heard a few of his podcasts. But again, he was a podcaster in search of a format. He'd done a few sort of top 5 podcasts, which seemed to take the concept from High Fidelity of talking to people about their top 5 films. Then he did one called Inglourious Basterds, which is a slightly tortured play on a film name. Yeah. He put out a tweet asking if anyone was interested in doing a retrospective of the Bond films.
Yes.
And he already had Becca on board, Becca Andrews, who obviously you now know as they've been with me for quite a long time. And I said yes, and that was mid-2015. So that's how we started. I'll sort of come on in a minute, I suppose, to early efforts, because I nearly stopped after my first go at it, to be honest.
Why was that?
Well, I'd never recorded anything. I didn't know if you recorded it in video or whether. I don't mean the end result. I knew the end result would be audio, but I didn't know if, just as a normal thing, podcasters tended to be looking at each other when they recorded or what.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because I've done a few now. As we said off air, that I've been doing podcasting for about 2 years, and the majority of the people that I've spoken to have been just over via Skype or via other means like that. But there has been one or two people that prefer to do it over Skype video.
Yeah, some do. James Bond Radio do. You can go and watch their shows on YouTube. You can watch our shows on YouTube, but you'll be looking at a still picture.
But what I was meaning there was that even from a point of view of podcasting, but it through the audio form, not through video itself, but us talking to each other over Skype via the video, and then it being released as an MP3. So,
well, I assumed you would because of what's just happened there. I've just interrupted the end of your sentence because I thought you were done, and we can't see each other's visual cues. But actually, the first time we tried to do it, I don't know if it eats greater bandwidth, but it just made a disaster of it, because you had me, Chris, Becca, and somebody else.
Yeah.
A lady called Florence, doesn't really matter who. I mean, she's still a friend, but I've never recorded with her since. And we started off with like the first Bond film, and we were all there on video. And 2 or 3 things were wrong with it. Firstly, I mean, in hindsight, I know my microphone settings would have been wrong, because as the person on your last show, or a couple of shows ago, from the perspective of listeners, pointed out, it takes you a while to learn. I'm not supposed to have like other speakers on and things like that. Although if you listen to our earlier shows, the sound quality is not as good, but it's not as bad as you might think. But it's got better as we've learned. Well, that's where you physically place it, and that's where you know. But we did this show, and we went straight into the first Bond film. We went straight into Dr. No, and it was just awful in every single way. Not only were we butting up against each other, myself and Florence, who get on perfectly fine in life, had absolutely terrible chemistry on this show. We kept misunderstanding everything each other was saying, and Skype was a disaster that night. It kept crashing on us, and I literally finished it a bit depressed. I thought, well, I had to go, and that was a disaster. And the only reason I'm still doing this is Chris Byrne is quite a positive type. And afterwards, he just messaged me and Becca and just said, let's have another go. And I was like, really? You want to have another go with that shit? For argument's sake, we took our second go at it a week later.
Yeah.
And in that week, we'd been chatting to each other. And firstly, we sorted out our name, what we wanted to call ourselves. We sorted out that we wanted to do it separate from his Cinematronics feed, because it was just going to go out as concentrated episodes. We figured out at least how shows would start, if nothing more than that. We figured out that we wanted to start with just a general chat. It was the best thing we could have done. Both of our first 2 of our 3 earliest series that have quite long running times on it, i.e. a lot of films. Bond ran for 37 episodes in its earliest run. We did Star Trek, and we ran for 19 episodes. Because obviously you do the films and you do some commentaries and do some other stuff as well. And you finish with a ranking if the series is long enough. And we had an intro episode. So by the time we rocked up for an intro episode, we were just chatting. And we weren't trying really hard to impress people with anything, or, you know, how you break a film down, or trying to say deeply intellectual things about it, or anything like that. We just sat, and 3 of us had a little chat about where we found the series, how we got into it, and all the rest of it. And it set us off on the right foot. Took us a long time to find our voices. as such, but we didn't have anything really embarrassing in our early episodes.
Yeah, well, I was just about to ask that. One of the things that I do like about the show, from what I've heard, is that it is very natural. It feels very natural in the way that you're talking to each other. Does it get edited down at all then, or is it literally just you go press record and away you go?
Yeah, I edit the show. I mean, if I was in a pinch, Chris can do it. But and occasionally when we do commentaries, you say, well, there's not much to do there, I'll take a pass at it. But generally speaking, I've edited the show since, I'd have to go back and count, but it was something like the first 15 episodes he did. But what then happened was Chris was doing an access to higher education course to go into nursing as a mature student. So it was his access year, and he was working full time as well.
Right, yeah.
So what was happening was we were recording shows, and they were getting backed up because Chris didn't have time to edit them.
Right.
We started in August. We started in early August, recorded about 3 before any went out, maybe even 4 actually. I think we might have recorded the intro and the first 3 films. So the first show went out at the end of August, and by November, December, it was starting to become a bit of a trickle. And over Christmas, he kept saying, "I'm sorry, I haven't recorded one yet. I'm sorry, I haven't edited it yet. I'm sorry." And I kept saying to him, "How hard is it?"
Right.
I don't mean how hard. I didn't mean that as an insult. How hard is it for you to edit it? I mean, how hard is editing? Can I download it and figure out how to do it? So I did. I just got myself Audacity.
Yeah.
Because Chris always recorded the show, and we've stuck with that, really. He still does. It's just we've had a few problems over the years where things have failed, so I record a backup now, that's all.
Right.
We got to around Christmas, and we had 3 or 4 backed up, and on top of that, we hadn't recorded for weeks. And talking about a show like Now Playing have not... I mean, in some respects, they've over-monetized and they over-edit, but they've not missed a show in years.
Yeah.
They're so organised that they've not missed a week in years. And so it was starting to bother me that a few months in, with none of us massive high flyers professionally, it's not like I'm working 80 hours a week. Mind you, he might have been at the time. So to cut a long story short, over the Christmas period, the last one of I'd said, send us that episode, and I had a go at editing it. The mistake I made the first time was combining all the tracks.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
So there's typically a track that's Chris, and there's a track that's the 2 of us or any other guests we've got. If you use my backup, obviously the primary track's me, and so on. But I did. You can mix and render, and I did that before I edited. So obviously, I can't edit out us talking over each other. But it was fine. Editing over the years has depended very much on the episode and how disciplined we are. I think more of the editing happens intra-track than it does in terms of the running time.
Right, okay. So basically what you're saying there is, like we've just done there, which I'll leave in actually, is when I interrupt you for the conversation, you interrupt me, but then you go into the track itself and you delete what I've said, and then it sounds like you're just talking on your own. So that's kind of what we're saying there, isn't it?
I don't mind a little bit, because you've got overlapping dialogue in life. Yeah. I mean, again, once more on the Now Playing example, they cut out every everything, cough, and I just think, as good as their show is, leave a bit of character in it. If I'm sat there sniffling and coughing and umming every single sentence, that's different. But I think what I'm getting round to, the average cut from an episode is probably 6 to 12 minutes.
Okay, and considering your length of time is normally around 2 hours, 3 hours, would you say?
I would say the average show length is it's probably feature length, so it's going to be anywhere from 145 to 220, something like that. Occasionally they'll run longer. Our longest show does top the 3 hour mark.
Right.
And when we got certain series, we struggle to keep long or short, in that we've got series where they're all like 150 or something like that. And then we've got series where, certainly when we got to the Nolan Batman films, they're all like, the 3 of them are like 250, 250 and 240 or something like that. The one that topped 3 hours was a music episode, and we were discussing, it was during the Bond series, so we were discussing everything from like 1987 on. There was just a lot to put in there, and by the time you put clips in and stuff as well, it ran to over 3 hours. Personally, I don't like them to be... I'm uncomfortable if it's less than 90 minutes.
Right.
Or even 100 minutes, really. And I'm equally uncomfortable if they're much over 2.5.
Right, okay, so there's like a nice little sweet spot that you prefer to have then.
I do because, I mean, James Bond Radio, I've took in recent years, I've sort of stopped doing it now, they'd review a film, but they do this marathon review of it, cut it in half and stick out 3.5 hour episodes, and I think that's a little bit too long.
Did you ever think to split them into parts, or were you just literally no, this has got to be one episode and that's it?
I don't understand the splitting into parts. I mean, I know I did one of these shows. It may have been the music one. I finished the recording, or I was editing, and it was getting down towards 3 hours, because I can cut more ruthlessly, and I have done. You know, I've cut half hours out of shows before, but generally speaking, I'm relatively light touch, because we know what we're doing, and they come in as long as they're meant to be. There's a couple of little things that I've developed through the show. Like, there is a part in the show where we're reviewing a film where one of us, typically me, will say, shall we discuss this film sequentially? Which simply means we've said hello to each other, we've given some general facts about the film, we've said what we think of it in general terms, and now we're going to talk through the film scene to scene. Sometimes I do a time check there, because that needs to be roughly on target. That needs to be happening about 35 to 40 minutes into the show.
Do you enjoy that aspect of it then, being sequential?
I genuinely believe it's developed into what it was designed to be, because we've never planned any of this. You know, when I look at the clock because I want to see where we are, it's only that if I'm saying, shall we discuss this film sequentially, and we're 5 minutes in, we're going to end up with an embarrassingly short show. If I say it and we're an hour and 20 minutes in, we have probably put far too much padding in. But broadly speaking, it's a conversation. I try as much to forget the show format as I can. But I do remember back to your original question, you said about cutting shows in half and all the rest of it. And I think we were talking about it just before we came on, because this is going out on the We Made This network, which is owned by Tony Black, who owns Set the Tape, which I write for. And I must talk about that very briefly in a minute, because that was the second part of your first question that I didn't answer. Tony Black, I think I put out a tweet going, this show is going to be 3 hours and 2 minutes. I can't believe it. And Tony tweeted back with 2 parts maybe, or split it in half. And I'm thinking, well, most people either stream or download and listen to it on like iTunes or Podbean or whatever. Just stop listening when you've had enough. I mean, it's quite simple. That, for example, we were talking through a sequence of films and a sequence of actors. So it's very simple that you get to the end of a certain film with a certain actor and you think we're an hour and 20 minutes in. Yeah, I've had enough of that for now. I think the only thing is, obviously, some people, I don't like them to be over 3 hours, because I think that would just slightly put people off. If you've got time to watch a film, you've got time to listen to one of our podcasts, but how often do you watch a 3 hour film?
Yeah, that's true. Although, having said that, supposedly the new Avengers film might have an interval in it.
They are talking about that. Yeah, no, I saw that just before we started recording as well, because they got it down to 3 hours, and I thought, well, that's meaningless because it's not final cut yet.
Yeah.
But they've started testing that cut, and that cut is working really well, so they're tempted to go with it. I don't find 3 hour films off-putting. I've watched Lawrence of Arabia and lots of other films that have been longer than that. But what I'm saying is, if we're putting them out every week, they need to be a bit shorter than that.
Yeah.
And I still think even at 2 hours, it's not going to be for everyone. Some people do prefer like 45 minutes or whatever, but, you know.
Mine is the daily commute. It takes me 20 minutes to get to work and 20 minutes to get back. So a 45-minute podcast for me works quite well. But having said that, if there's a long podcast, you kind of mentioned it there, that if there's a point where you just pause it and you just come back to it on the next day commute, or you listen to it when you're at home. So I personally just like literally, well, just because of the software that I've got, that it will remember where I was and I'll just continue on where I was.
The other thing is, I mean, I tend to, I've got an office-based job, so I tend to listen to them at work.
Right.
It depends what I'm doing. There's a sweet spot on level of concentration in that I find podcasts help me concentrate unless I really need to concentrate, and then they're distracting.
Yeah.
So if I'm writing a paper, I don't need to hear a voice warbling on in my ear. But generally speaking, as I go about my work, I can listen to podcasts quite happily, and I quite enjoy them. And the thing is, with if they're too short, I go through too many. And I just like the idea of 2 to 3, particularly if you focus on a particular podcast. You might only get through like 3 in a day, but you've had a big slice of something they've worked really hard on. I like that. I mean, you just asked about. Sorry, you were asking, and I forgot to address that bit of the question. If there's anything else creative I do, that's really only started in the autumn, because again, Tony Black launched Set the Tape with Owen Hughes, and they put out something about September 17, something like that. Said anyone interested in writing for us. And the funny thing is, the thing I've always been told I'm best at is writing.
Right, okay.
Podcasting came along later. I mean, I toyed with writing for some websites. I was even invited to it for a few times. And I just bottled out. I think I made some general remark about, happy to help out if you need or anything. Well, that's not the kind of enthusiasm they're looking for. You know, if you're desperate for someone to write you something, like, you know, I'm not. So I got to about, might have been late September, and the podcast that Do You Expect Us to Talk, it sort of looked like it was in for a hiatus.
Yeah.
Which it did. It didn't record for about 11 weeks, and we're on something similar now. That will end soon, and it will end hopefully permanently, because we've had little hiatuses over the years, but they've only ever been like 3 or 4 weeks or something. This is something else, and it shouldn't. There's nothing fundamentally that's changing in any one of our lives that anyone need think, well, it's the beginning of the end for the show. It's not. It's just one of us has a certain circumstance they're trying to figure out. That's all. Tony put out for writers again. And I went back and said, yeah, I'm interested. Thinking, am I? I don't know. And he wrote back and said, have you got any examples of stuff you've written? And I'm like, no, because I've talked it all.
Right, yeah.
I've talked it all. That's what I do. Funnily enough, my probably biggest talent is writing, but what I need to do is talk. And So I was just sat there for a few days, and then there was various conversations going on, and I got the idea for an article, put it in. They liked it. They edited that one a little bit, but since then I've sort of done a lot of film reviews and articles and books reviews and TV and largely film, but I've done a bit of everything.
Yeah, well, I noticed that one of the ones you did was Star Trek Discovery in New Eden, which was a particularly interesting episode, going back to kind of like the TNG and TOS era, which I read recently, because I do read the Set the Tape stuff, so and I really enjoyed that, and I did notice before I came to research yourself that it was yourself who had done that episode review. So
yeah, with that, I Tony took the one thing I will say about Set the Tape. We'll get back to podcasts in a minute, but just while I'm talking about Set the Tape, the one thing that surprised me is I had no idea what the mechanism for giving people reviews would be.
Right?
Yeah. So if I say, here's something I've written for your site, do you like my writing? Yes. Do you want me to work for you? Albeit it's a hobby, but do you want me to work for you? Yes. I didn't know that, like, when Star Wars Episode 9 comes out, how they decide who gets that.
Right.
Without giving everything away behind the scenes, all I will say is it's particularly democratic. I don't know if they want me to tell you exactly how they do it, but it's quite democratic.
Okay.
So I've been able to sort of do things now with Discovery. The point I'm making is what they don't do, because it's their site, is go, here are all the films coming out, and by the way, we've picked off all the cream ones already.
Yeah.
They don't do that. Every now and again, Tony was always going to do Mary Poppins Returns. Yeah. Right at the start, he said, that his name was on that one. But broadly speaking, we all get like a fair shot.
Yeah.
But Discovery, his name was on.
Right. Okay.
And I thought, well, that's fair enough. It's his site. It's not like they're nabbing everything. But then he actually wrote out and said, can we round robin it? Mm. So he'll do episode 1, I'll do 2. Somebody else did 3, he'll do 4, I'll do 5. So I've got 2, 5, 8, and 11, I think.
Okay.
There will be more of those. But yeah, that episode, I was so glad I agreed with what he said about the first one, because I thought this is going to, if I fundamentally think he's talking out of his arse, what's my review going to sound like following his? But it does see, we're seeing Discovery much the same way. It was a shorter kind of article because it was TV. But yeah, I try and do at least a film a week for them. I don't do every week, but I do most weeks. And I get a fair shot of them. I've done some reasonably sized films so far. I got to do Aquaman. I got to do Stan and Ollie recently. I got to do Creed 2. It looks like I might be doing Captain Marvel. And yeah, so that's kind of enjoyable.
Back to the podcast then. Was the idea to just do Bond right the way through, episode to episode?
Yeah, the idea was to do Bond and stretch it out a bit, because I think even though I'd got to the stage of life that I'm realising time goes by quite quickly, when you're staring down the barrel of 30 or 40 episodes, it still sounds like, well, that'll be a decent back catalogue. You know what I mean? That'll be a decent canon of episodes. So what we were going to do was Bond plus a few bits. So I don't think we knew when we started. So we did an intro episode and we knew we'd do a rankings episode. So that immediately puts you on 27 episodes, because we knew we were going to do Never Say Never Again, which means that with Spectre coming out, they're 25 films. 24 official and 1 unofficial. We agreed we weren't doing Casino Royale 1967 because it's really fucking awful. But it's not so good. It's funny. It's actually quite painful to watch.
Right. Okay.
But I was quite happy to do Never Say Never Again. So all I'm saying is we're going to do that, and so you think, well, that's 27 episodes, and then you think, well, we might do episodes about 3 or 4 flavors of Bond, like best villains or whatever. So I think I probably thought it would come out at about 30. And then a few episodes in, we decided we'd pause at the end of the sort of Connery Lazenby era and do a couple of commentaries.
Right.
And I think subconsciously, because that was my idea, and I think subconsciously that's because I'm always searching for the most naturalistic format I can find.
Right, yeah.
Where I don't sound like I'm doing a show. And commentaries are where we tend to achieve it, because we forget we're recording. We remember just enough to talk, and I like that. And the only other place I've ever managed that is when I do Cinematronics episodes with Chris. We review the summer each year. They feel really natural, and I don't know why it is. So we did commentaries. To cut a long story short, we got about halfway through, and we were really enjoying it, and people were starting to say nice things. I wasn't expecting people to listen to it, you know?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden people you never met go, oh, that was really funny, and and all the rest of it. And it definitely got more comedic. I think we played up to that a lot.
Right.
But yeah, about halfway through, we started saying, well, why don't we just continue? There's no reason this has to, you know. And then we said, let's do something shorter next. And so we did. And to cut a long story short, we did Indiana Jones, and then we did Star Trek, largely because we'd done some music episodes. We know a music author called Charlie Brigden at Movie Drone on Twitter. He writes for The Quietus. He's written for Film School Reject and others. He's a film music journalist, basically. And he asked if he could come on for that. So
yeah. So has it always been the 3-person podcast, or have you had any guests on, or has it just been the three of you?
Charlie's been the only guest. It's a 3. I think that is surreptitiously almost a now playing influence, I think, because they're a 3. And I think that bled in. I think some of it's just coincidence because they had 2 of them and they wanted a 3rd, but the fact we've stayed a 3. Charlie Brigden came along and did a couple of music episodes, including the 3-hour show we did. And then when we said we were going to do Star Trek, he said, do you mind if I join you for it? And we said, yeah, we don't mind at all. We don't want to go to a permanent 4, but him to drop in for series now and again is fine. So he was there for that. He was there for Star Wars. If we ever do something like The Terminator, he's likely to be there for that, and he'll definitely be there if we ever do Planet of the Apes. But no, we're a 3, and the show is sort of equally owned by the 3 of us, in that, like, if one of us left, the show's dead. It would have to be something different.
It's probably the natural playoff that you've got between you. I think you're up to 136-ish episodes with Avengers: Age of Ultron, which was an interesting episode to listen to, being that it's not the best Avengers film or even Marvel film in the world. So I really enjoyed listening to that, and the voice that the 3 of you have got together really works. The chemistry you've got together really works, and obviously that's been something that you've done over the course of time, over those 130 odd episodes. Yeah. The next thing I was going to mention actually was the summer reviews that you've done, and
you've done your research, because I thought, how would you know that? But you've had a look.
I have, because you spoke quite a bit about the World Cup at one point, which was quite an interesting little listen to, and I noticed that they're like episode, I think that's episode 13 or 14 or something like that. And you talk about generally the events that's coming on, that has been over I think is it the first part about what's coming up and what's been over the winter. And
what we did was, I can't remember how the first one came. We've done it for 3 years now. So 16, 17 and 18. And the first year we did a 2.5-hour summer review. And I thought, that's fine. People can break that down as they like. The second year it ran to like 3.5 hours. And then last year there was so much being released, and some of it quite early, because the summer started with like Black Panther in February. Yeah. Black Panther was released on Valentine's Day or around there. So Chris said we got to do this in 2 parts. So we did a part before summer even started, because summer doesn't start till the 21st of June. And we recorded an episode on like the 8th of June or something. And then we did another one at the start of September. Yeah. And they come to a combined total of, 5 hours or something. And it's just literally, we picked the first film that looks and feels like a summer film, and then just go through the summer from then. And we tend to guillotine it at the end of August. How that'll be in future years, I don't know. But we just, I don't know. It just becomes. I think it's because I prefer us being a 3, and I'd rather Becca was there. But the dynamic changes when it's just 2.
Right.
And I think I do manage to find that complete air of being earwigged in a pub.
Yeah.
So yeah, the episode numbering is all the fact that Cinematronics is the site the show is published from. It's Chris's Twitter handle. It's Chris's site. I think he was always intending to do his own show as well, and it's never really happened.
Right, yeah.
He does the odd episode now and again. Four of those episodes have been summer reviews. One of them was Batman v Superman, which I was on, and another one was he interviewed me. So I've been on about half a dozen of the episodes that are there anyway.
Yeah. What I noticed from the summer reviews as well, that you were talking about the films that were out at that time, and the dichotomy in some ways of the likes of Skyscraper and like Black Panther, for example, that the breadth of film that was out, Lady Bird and things like that, there was quite an interesting juxtaposition between the kind of films that were coming out. What are you looking into 2019? For me personally, as someone who's seen some of the programming that we've got for films coming up, there is a lot of high budget films coming out, a lot of Disney films coming out. So how do you think that's going to affect your summer reviews as we get into 2019?
I think we'll just have to see how it goes. I mean, if we get to the start of June and it's like we've got way too much here, it might have to go into 3. I don't know. I mean, if I look at, the first. You got to think, well, what's the first summer film? Well, the first summer film this year is Captain Marvel.
Yeah. And
it's out something like March the 8th. So it's a bit later than last year. So that's not actually too bad. But I don't know. I mean, we're unlikely. We try not to start too early. I mean, you could say Alita Battle Angel, but we're not going to include that, I don't think. To be honest, I'm struggling to remember what's coming. I mean, obviously, I know there's a Star Wars film at the end of the year. And obviously, I know there's, I think, Lion King's this year.
Yeah, Lion King, Aladdin, there's Captain Marvel, Avengers, Frozen 2's in the winter, November before Star Wars as well. So there's a lot coming up.
Yeah, the summer season may not be as stacked as you think. I mean, there'll be a lot released, but
I think it'll be a consistent over the year rather than being, there's a stash of people.
And we still haven't caught with the trend on that because we don't tend to do like autumn reviews or anything. It's actually just, there's normally a spare night where we fancy having a chat, and we've got into the habit of doing these.
Yeah.
And it kind of gets me into a discipline of going to see things as well.
Yeah.
Because I don't miss too much because I can't talk about it then. And in fact, if you go back to the earliest one, there's plenty he saw that I didn't, because he's got like a Cineworld card, so he sees everything. I see most things, and by last year that was another thing. We'd both seen so much that once you start talking about them, I mean, I think it was about 14 or 15 films across the 2 shows, something like that.
Yeah.
Well, you do get chatting, don't you? So yeah, they're going to take up a few hours.
They will indeed. I mean, for me, what's the real pain for a lot of things that I have to do is, especially for films that I want to go and see. You mentioned off air about the Film Guff interview that I did a few episodes back. That I work in a cinema, but to turn the film off, I've got to go into the cinema. So the amount of films that I've seen the last 20 minutes of or the last 10 minutes of and not seen the rest of the film is sometimes an absolute travesty, because I'm like, and speaking of Mary Poppins before, Anywhere to Go But Up is the song that is in my head constantly now, because every single day I had to go in and listen to that 3 or 4 times a day, and it was
because that's the last reel where they're going.
That's the last reel, yeah. Effectively, you walk in and you've got. You know what I mean. Yeah. Well, I don't know exactly, yeah. But we haven't used reels for a while.
Yeah, I know, that's what I mean.
But yeah, so going in and seeing those last minute films, a lot of times I've just got to put my head down and just cover my ears and just get into the projection room and turn the monitors down, because that is a big concern for me. It's one of those things I've got to put my head down and go with it. So moving on to another podcasting area that you're involved or have been involved in and are getting back involved in is the Smorgasbord. Can you give us a bit more detail on that?
Yeah, Smorgasbord, there was never any plan there. I think, was it Becca or Chris? One of the 2 of them said to me, some guy called Pete has asked if we want to go on their show, on his show.
It's just some guy called Pete.
Yeah, and it's like, well, who's Pete? And I think they honestly said, "Oh, I think he's something to do with Tony Black." I don't know if you were Tony, if you're listening. I don't think they were suggesting you two were in a relationship. I don't even know if those two. I've never spoken to Tony about Pete, and I've never spoken to Pete about Tony, so I don't actually know if they even know each other. Right? Tony's never appeared on Smorgasbord. I've never heard Pete on a Tony podcast. I don't tend to record with Tony these days anyway. Yeah. So it's like, did they even know each other, or did I just ask a question and they guessed an answer? So whatever it was, I went on, and I only realised the night I turned up. I think I was only episode 5, which at the time would have felt not unimpressive. But of course, I'm now looking back down the barrel of 200 odd podcasts, and I'm thinking, God, he was only on about the 5th one when I appeared.
Right.
And it's at Smorgasbord Pod on Twitter, but Smorgasbord is board as in your board, B-O-R-E-D.
Oh, right, okay, rather than board, B-O-A-R-D. Okay.
Or B-O-R-D, I think Smorgasbord is spelled.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
B-O-R-E-D in this case. And he's a bit of a throwback, actually. He kind of sounds like he could be presenting Just a Minute or something.
Right, okay.
He does have a voice that wouldn't be unsuited to, like... It's a bit like if Alan Bennett presented a panel show, right? And I got on this show, and suddenly I'm being sent, like, articles about, like, World of Weird type articles. Although every now and again they're from, like, MSNBC or something. And right. Why have MSNBC done this article on penises and stuff? But you'll read, and it was bizarre articles, and it was, like, almost improv, but not like Whose Line Is It Anyway or something. I didn't have to make up songs or anything like that. But I did, you did have to do some monologuing at different points. You did have to read out funny articles and try and make them funnier. Right. Because obviously anyone can just read out an article. What are you going to say between sentences and between, that sort of thing. And it just snowballed from there. I was appearing all the time.
How did you find having to make them funny, or how did you react to that?
I just loved it. Because the thing is, I don't get any nerves as a podcaster at all.
Okay.
I always expected I would, because I'd done no performance of any kind. And, you see seasoned comedians, singers and everything else say, yeah, they get some butterflies before it starts. And really, after about the first episode or so that I ever recorded, I never really felt any nerves. Actually, Smorgasbord kind of gives me a bit of a buzz, because it starts and you go, I don't know what I'm going to be asked. I mean, one of the Christmas episodes, I'm there singing falsetto. And you just go, well, I had no idea I was going to do that. It's one of those things that you'll be very, very careful, because I've appeared on it drunk in the past.
Oh,
and it just doesn't work. You think, oh, this will be such a laugh. But unless you're in that very short-lived sweet spot, actually you end up sounding bored more than anything else. But I ended up appearing like every 3rd or 4th episode. And all of a sudden it was like I'd been on it like 5 times and no one else had, apart from, Chris Haig, I think, has been on a similar number to me. And it's still the case. I've been on more episodes than anyone except Pete. I think I did my 16th the other night. And this was just going on all the time. And then he did a Christmas special. And it was just a blast, and I became very associated with the show. I don't think I'm the only one, but I'm one of the people very associated with it. And then he spun that off into Three Wise Men, which was just basically idiotic problem page type questions, really. Pete's become quite a collaborator. I mean, he's marrying in a month's time. I've never met the man in person. And I'll be at that, and I'll be at the Stag Night and all the rest of it. And it's a lovely way to sort of build a community. But yeah, if I had to do one thing in life, it would be, do you expect us to talk? And there's no question about that. But
yeah,
Pete is just an absolute joy to work with, and it brings other people in as well, because he's always got a revolving door of guests. So people like Adi and Hang and Chris Haig and Amy Walker, and sometimes Chris, me and Becca have been on it. We've effectively taken the show over ourselves in the past, and right. It's built such a network. They're not people that I see that generally. They're kind of an online presence in my life, but all been built out of this.
Has there been anything spectacularly memorable while you've been on the show?
No, but I always feel like I'm about to say way too much. I always feel like I'm about to give out a story about myself I can't take back.
Yeah.
There's been a couple of like public toilet stories and that. We're not talking in the George Michael sense, by the way.
Okay.
But like stories where you go, why did I say that? It's basically a story about me with my dick out. Right? No, I mean, there's nothing. I don't know. You'd have to ask other people. I mean, I did cut a trailer together for our listeners once. Me and Chris, Chris appeared on the show and did the most memorable thing I've ever heard on it. Because he was asked, "Would you rather?" Pete had this round called "Would you rather?"
Right.
And
okay.
It was "Would you rather be caught watching porn or dry humping a pillow?"
Yeah, and we've one of my friends actually had one of his best friends did that to him a lot, and a lot were kind of really. I can't even repeat them on air.
Well, Chris, but the thing is, neither choice is great, right?
No.
But Chris not only made a choice, he went for it quite enthusiastically.
Oh God!
So I had this really enthusiastic clip of him talking about like why dry humping a pillow is a great idea.
Right.
And it had followed some story about me getting stage fright in a public toilet and all of us giggling. And I cut that together as a trailer. So occasionally someone will talk to us about that, but that's literally because they're our listeners and they've heard it.
Yeah.
I can't honestly remember. Some of the articles are funny. I mean, I remember doing it's become a running joke. Pete tends to find a story that has some bodily function in it.
Right.
For me. And it'll be the weird news. So we've had like stories about cock rings. We've had all sorts. Some of the stories have been the memorable bits. Like, oh, that was the episode you had to read out that bit about this.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm struggling actually because I've done quite a lot of them and I haven't done them for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, I recorded the other night and I won't have recorded with Pete for about 6 months before that.
How can people find you online and how can people find the podcasts themselves?
Okay, so Do You Expect Us to Talk is at Expect Us to Talk on Twitter. You should spot it. If you're listening in the next few days, you'll know when you've spotted it because it's all Marvel themed at the moment because we're on the Marvel series. Smorgasbord Pod is at Smorgasbord Pod, but remember BORED, not BORD or BOARD, neither of those.
No.
That's where you'll find that. I've been on a few episodes of Eccentric Earth. You can look that up as well. In terms of the website, so that's Twitter. Facebook, we're facebook.com/Expect Us to Talk. The website is cinematronics.co.uk. That's cinema, TRONIX. So cinematronics.co.uk. You find me at the Pasty Kid 1976. That's PASTY. So the Pasty Kid 1976 on Twitter. I think that covers most of what I do. Oh, setthetape.com. That's a film and popular culture website. So that's got film reviews, game reviews, TV reviews, book reviews, film discussion pieces, rankings, all that sort of thing. I contribute a fraction of what's on there, but in a given week, I'll normally contribute something.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks, Dave, for coming on. It's much appreciated. And from myself, again, thank you all for listening. I am part of the We Made This podcast network, as you've heard during the show. Thank you very much for listening. And until next time, see you soon.